If you're someone who struggles with anxiety, or if you're naturally an anxious personality, you know firsthand that it doesn't really take much for us to feel overwhelmed. But what if I told you that there are very common behaviors and behavioral patterns that are shared amongst everyone who struggles with anxiety in one way or another? And that if we learn to identify those behaviors, we can stop ourselves before we get to that tipping point. We can pause and lower our general stress level so that we never feel overwhelmed. Well, if that interests you, stay tuned because that's what we're discussing today on JD's Corner. Hey, welcome to JD's Corner. I'm JD and this is my corner. Today we're going to be discussing a few common behaviors or behavior patterns shared amongst those who struggle with anxiety. Learning to identify these problems is key in ensuring that we never let our stress get the better of us. Because if we're honest, we kind of all deal with stress, and it seems to be a pretty constant thing, but it doesn't have to have power over us. We can learn to lower our overall stress threshold, which I spoke about in this video here. And when we learn to do that, we can actually live a calmer, more balanced life, not always giving in to feelings of overwhelm and feelings of despair. So what are some of these common traits? What are some of these behaviors, you ask? Well, one of them is just speaking very quickly. A very common behavioral pattern amongst those who struggle with anxiety is that we tend to speak really, really fast. It's an outpour of our anxiety. We have so much nervous energy built up inside of us that it comes out by us speaking naturally very, very quickly. And while sometimes we like to shrug that off or maybe make excuses for it, the reality is we often aren't even aware that we're doing it. We speak so fast that it's hard for those around us to keep up. And what we really are doing is by engaging in speech at that pace, we're maintaining a higher intensity of stress at all times. And it may not feel like stress, but it very much is the evidence of stress. And so if you can learn to catch yourself when you're speaking quickly, you're already one step closer to helping lower your overall anxiety levels by calming down and learning to practice the behavior or the discipline of speaking slower. So that's one common behavioral pattern shared amongst many who have anxiety. Another closely related to that is the intensity or the volume with which we speak. Those who struggle with anxiety are intense. We're naturally intense people because if we're honest, we're pretty high strung. We have so much tension or anxiety or stress going in us, just coursing through our veins, that it comes out with excitement and passion, which is good, but it's not always necessary or not merited to that level or to that degree. And so anxious personalities tend to respond intensely. And while we might describe it as passionately or enthusiastically, if we're honest, it tends to be kind of all the time or very easy. And so we speak very loudly and very enthusiastically at all times. And we have to learn to catch ourselves that even though something is exciting and we should celebrate it, and maybe there are things that we're passionate about and that's good, it could also be that there's a little bit of stress stored up in us. There's a little bit of nervous energy inside of us that we haven't purged and we haven't dealt with. And this intensity with which we speak is indicative of the fact that we're anxious. And so we got to do something about that. And that's okay, because learning to catch yourself and learning to spot this in your behavior pattern will help you to purge all that excess energy that is clearly stored inside of you before it manifests in another extreme emotion that is perhaps more detrimental to your mental health. Thirdly, we have physiological behaviors or physiological responses to stress that aren't as obvious. I mean, if you're having a panic attack and you're having a problem breathing and you're having pain in your chest, okay, that's pretty obvious that you're dealing with anxiety. But what about less noticeable things that are sometimes more consistent and are sometimes flying under the radar? One of those is twitching, random muscle twitching. While it can be indicative of other medical factors, the truth is, oftentimes anxious personalities, because of all that excess cortisol, all that excess stress in your body, we twitch. For a lot of people, it comes up particularly in the eyelids. And that's not always just because of exhaustion, though that can be a reason. Stress and anxiety can be a reason why your eyes twitch or other parts of your body tend to twitch, but very much so in your eyelids. And so pay attention to your eyelids. If they are twitching a lot lately, consistently all throughout the day, it's often an indication that you are very stressed and you need to rest. And so learning to identify this, again, can be helpful because it's the body's way of telling you, hey, I'm stressed. Can we do some progressive relaxation? Can we activate our parasympathetic nervous system? Can we do whatever it takes to sort of wind down or unwind and purge some of this nervous energy? And if you don't know what I'm talking about or you don't know how to do that, I talk all about how to get rid of nervous energy in this video here, and I encourage you to follow with that. Another thing that people with anxiety tend to do is we tend to eat really quickly. You might not have ever thought of the fact that your eating speed or the speed with which you consume food is actually an indication of anxiety, but it is. And many times individuals who have anxiety or are dealing with a lot of stress, they're eating really, really quickly. Now, there are many reasons or theories as to why we do that, and I'm not really going to get into all of that here. But the truth is, if you are an individual who eats really, really fast, consistently, not just one off, but it's almost like all of your meals, you sort of inhale them, that actually is an indication that you have a lot of stored up nervous energy, that you can be very stressed. And so learning to pause, slow down, taste the food, appreciate the moment, learning to do that is going to be very, very helpful. And that leads me to another common behavior or behavior pattern of those who struggle with anxiety, and that's you get mad easily. Irritability. If you're always flustered or if you fluster very easily, maybe all it takes is someone having a difference of opinion from you, or maybe something doesn't quite go the way you had visualized or planned. If that causes you to become irritable, angered, or just feeling flustered very quickly, that also is indication that you have anxiety and you need to work to lower your stress levels. You need to work to activate, again, that parasympathetic nervous system and calming yourself down. Now, these things don't happen instantaneously. These are patterns that you have to learn to identify and then respond accordingly. If you feel an eye twitch, if you feel you're speaking really quickly, if you feel you're speaking really loudly, if you feel you're getting angry easily, it's good to identify these things and learn to identify them so that in that moment when you finally do spot it, you can do the opposite. We speak slower, we eat slower, we speak softer, we calm ourselves down. All of this is going to be very helpful and very beneficial for you in the long term as you're trying to invest in yourself and your overall health to being more balanced and more holistic. Another common behavior or behavioral pattern is you tend to be very tired all the time. And that shouldn't surprise you because if you are an anxious person or if you've been dealing with a lot of stress, then you've had a lot of cortisol or adrenaline released into your body. And while that puts you on the fight or flight response and it activates all sorts of other symptoms, prolonged exposure to this level of adrenaline or this level of cortisol eventually does overwhelm the body to the point of exhaustion. And so if you find yourself feeling just really, really tired, especially in the middle of the day, especially if you're fatigued and there's not really a reason why, you've not been working, maybe that day you've had a day off and you've not been working hard, or you didn't go work out, or you haven't pushed yourself, but you feel exhausted, chances are you're overstressed. Chances are you've been activating your cortisol release in your system too consistently and for far too long of a time. And so this is also helpful as an indicator to us that we need to slow down, practice what we talked about with progressive relaxation to bring our overall stress levels far, far lower. Again, learning to invest in our longevity and our fullness of life and recovery. Another common shared behavior or behavioral pattern is the fact that you can't sit still. Anxious personalities tend to go from one thing to another and find being calm or being still actually quite difficult. Usually when anxious personality types begin doing progressive relaxation, when you start for the first time learning to breathe deeply and lower your heart rate and kind of slow down, you find that it's actually difficult. And that proves to you that you're not used to stillness. You're not actually used to life being lived in a relatively peaceful state. We're so high strung that we're so used to just go that we can't even sit still. And when we finally do start to try to calm ourselves down, our mind wanders and it races all throughout the day. And so if you find yourself naturally very antsy, or if you find yourself just hopping about and always having to do something, always having to fiddle with your fingers, or just you can't sit still, that's a good indication that it's possible that you're just very anxious and you have a lot of stress hormone in your body that needs to be dealt with. Another behavior that is very common amongst those who struggle with anxiety is something we call magnifying the problem. And that's when we make mountains or big deals out of something that is actually not so big. If there is only a 10% chance that something bad will happen, anxious personalities tend to assume the very worst, and maybe 80, 90, or even 100% they believe that something is going to happen, and so they ruminate always on the worst case scenario. And so if you always find yourself focusing or worrying about the worst case scenario, it's probably indicative that you're stressed and anxious and need to calm down and again work on lowering your overall anxiety levels. And the last one that I'm going to address today, because there's no way that in this video I could ever address them all, that's something we call scanning. See, people who struggle with anxiety, specifically those who have experienced panic attacks, you're always checking to see if your symptoms are there. I know that was definitely the case with me when I started dealing with my dizzy spells or my vertigo, which were induced by my stress and caused by my anxiety. I was always checking, am I dizzy now? Is the room spinning? And you're always looking, or if you have, let's say, twitches or other feelings, you're always looking and trying to examine your body. You're sort of scanning your surroundings to see if the symptom is still there. Well, that's indicative of someone who has a lot of stress. You're actually stressing about the symptoms of stress, and that is a horrible cycle that doesn't help things. And so if you find yourself constantly scanning or looking around to try to see, hey, how do I feel? Am I feeling anxious? Am I exhibiting these anxiety produced symptoms? If you find yourself always wondering and trying to check, that in itself is indicative that you're a little on edge and need to lower your anxiety levels. And so the reason I gave this list again is because learning to identify these behaviors or behavior patterns, it's not easy, it's not instantaneous, but it's something that if we invest in, it'll help us respond to them appropriately, bringing our overall stress level down, learning to calm ourselves, and learning to invest in relaxation. And so the more you learn to identify these behaviors, and then the sooner you start to behave the opposite of that, the sooner you'll experience a great release of stress in your system, your body, your mind, and the sooner you'll actually start to enjoy more peace in your day, a better state of calm that is more lasting. Well, if you have found these resources helpful, if you're appreciating the content produced by the channel, it would help me and the channel out a lot if you would take the time to subscribe, hit the like button, and even share the video with those that you think would benefit from it. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to chatting with you again here on JD's Corner.